Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Dylan Rodríguez, he, him pronouns. I'm wearing kind of an orange peach colored shirt. I'm Filipino, I'm brown. I got 2 earrings in. I got short hair. I'm sitting in an office with a bunch of books and some native Hawaiian art behind me, my daughter's drawing of the Death Fairy behind me, and a map of California prisons just behind my head. With apologies, for some reason, Zoom is not allowing our closed captions to work today. But we do have live ASL interpretation, and the recording that will be posted of this event will absolutely have the closed captions available. So my apologies for that technical glitch. Again, my name is Dylan Rodríguez. I'm here in my capacity in part as the co-director of the Center for Ideas in Society. I am a professor in the Department of Black Study and the Department of Media and Cultural Studies here at UC Riverside. It's a privilege to welcome you to the inaugural event of UCR's On Violence Experimental Study Sequence and the Health, Humanities, and Disability Justice HHDJ Initiative. This is our first event with Liat Ben-Moshe on her incredible book, Decarcerating Disability, a talk and conversation with the students of a graduate course here called Racial-Colonial State Violence, and myself. A note regarding the On Violence experimental study sequence. This sequence builds on the urging of Frantz Fanon's revolutionary anti-colonial thought to create a sequence of conversations with authors of key texts addressing violence, empire, liberation, solidarity, abolition, and the problem of so-called man and the human. These short 60 to 90-minute sessions will be led by students of this graduate course, Racial Colonial State Violence at UC Riverside, taught by me. Online participants will have opportunities to engage with the authors during the sessions to whatever extent time permits. This is an experimental sequence. We hope you will read the author's work prior to each study meeting, but as importantly, we aspire to cultivate a sense of intellectual collaboration, curiosity, and activated thought. So thank you so much to everybody for coming through. I'm very grateful to my colleagues, Fusan and Carla and others, Matt, everybody at the UCR Health, Humanities, and Disability Justice Initiative for inviting the Center for Ideas in Society and me to co-sponsor this event. I'm very privileged to include this as part of the programming stream that I'm curating at the center titled Decolonizing Humanism. So just a reminder for folks, this event is being recorded for posting on the Decolonizing Humanism Center for Ideas in Society channel on YouTube. And a big shout out to our live ASL interpreters, Amber Rose, who's interpreting right now, and Sofia Castillo, who will be rotating with Amber. So for those unfamiliar, many North American universities include boilerplate land acknowledgements in the introduction of campus events. I humbly dissent from this practice of acknowledgement by offering instead an urging and provocation toward activation, mobilization, and collective study and movement against conditions of occupation, anti-Black violence, and coloniality. So I open this occasion by acknowledging Rupert and Jeanette Costo's legacy of reclaiming, protecting, and sustaining Indigenous presence at UC Riverside, including epistemological, archival, and physical forms of Indigenous thought and being. The University of California as a whole is a settler colonial institution that occupies unceded land and ecologies continuously inhabited by original and ongoing human caretakers, including the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples on and around the UC Riverside campus. This institution is populated by Indigenous, Aboriginal, and First Nations peoples from all over the world, many of whom are among faculty, students, and staff. This fact makes it ever more distressing that the University of California has failed to repatriate and return hundreds of thousands of Indigenous and Native peoples' remains and artifacts to their tribes and peoples of origin, despite a decades-long legal mandate and recent incriminating state audit. UC Riverside is blocks away from the site where the Riverside Police Department stole the life of 19-year-old Taisha Miller, a matter that continually imprints the centrality of anti-Black state and extra-state violence to this institution and surrounding geography. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department, with which UC Riverside has a cooperating police relationship, is regionally and nationally notorious for creating cruel and fatal conditions in local jails for people who are awaiting trial and cannot afford bail. It's a shared responsibility to address how the University of California is actively complicit in long and ongoing histories of anti-Black state and state-condoned violence, especially as university police forces continuously accumulate a record of harassment, intimidation, surveillance, and aggression against profiled, criminalized, and otherwise targeted people and communities. It is thus with a sense of urgent obligation that I offer these words in place of the sanctioned so-called land acknowledgement. I'm honored to open this precious occasion by calling forward new, old, collective, and experimental efforts to create decolonized, abolitionist, and liberated futures. Welcome, everybody. It's now my pleasure to pass the proverbial microphone to my friend and colleague, Fusan Wang, who I will tag right now.
Hello. Thank you, Dylan. I'm Fusan Wang. I'm a professor in the English department. I am an Asian American man with short black hair and glasses. I have on a white collared shirt with a repeating pattern of flamingos and palm trees. In the background is an office with bookcases and a coffee machine. There. This conversation is co-sponsored, as Dylan mentioned, by the Health, Humanities, and Disability Justice Initiative, abbreviated HHDJ. Carla Mazzio in English, Matthew King in Religious Studies, and I, Fusan Wang in English, are co-PIs of a 3-year multi-campus UC research grant entitled Abolition, Medicine, and Disability Justice, Renewing the Social. And this grant will run from 2023 to 2025. Our goal is the creation of an HHDJ lab to ground research, teaching, and community outreach with disability justice as a central consideration. We will put on events like this and fund graduate students as well for reading groups, workshops, presentations, and fieldwork. This lab is meant to facilitate and foster interdisciplinary and intersectional conversations about disability justice. I'm just going to throw the mic to my colleague, Carla Mazzio, to introduce our guest of honor.
Okay. I'm Carla Mazzio. I go by she, her, hers. I'm white. I have sort of short brown hair with a few highlights concealing the gray. I've got bright orange framed glasses, plain black shirt. Today I'm looking fairly kempt, and behind me is just white closet doors and a green wall. Okay, so as Fusan mentioned, I'm part of the HHDJ startup team, which is both new and also really expanding every day, including, importantly for today, Dylan Rodríguez, who has agreed generously and very actively to serve as one of our community advisory board members for the project. And more than that, really collaborate and work and think with us. So special thanks to Dylan. One more order of business. If you're interested in the HHDJ work we're all doing, if you'd like to get involved or just hear about events, I've posted a link in the chat that just goes to a one-pager, give you a sense of the project and possible opportunities for involvement, even just getting on an email list. I do want to say that on there, you'll see a link to our next second event featuring, let me say first, it'll be on November 1st at 10:30 in the morning, running about 90 minutes. And the event is called Hunger, Mindfulness, and Incarceration. It's a conversation between UCR's Farah Godrej and Dana Simmons on their intersecting issues and questions crossing and at stake in their work. I think Dana and Farah are, I believe, with us in this room today. And so today is really the beginning, not really the beginning, it's part of ongoing and developing some conversations across UCR. Okay, enough with that. Liat Ben-Moshe, we are so honored to welcome and introduce you and thank you for your work and for joining us today. Dr. Ben-Moshe is Associate Professor of Criminology, Law, and Justice at the University of Illinois, Chicago. She's, of course, the author of Decarcerating Disability, Deinstitutionalization, and Prison Abolition, the very book we're all here to learn a bit more about, and think together about today. She's also co-editor of a really important collection entitled Disability Incarcerated, Imprisonment and Disability in the United States and Canada. So for folks not yet familiar with her work, Dr. Ben-Moshe has been an extraordinary force in expanding the field of disability studies. Decarcerating Disability maps out in deeply thoughtful and innovative ways intersecting forms and genealogies of incarceration for those deemed criminal, those deemed mad, and or those deemed disabled, while also interrogating histories and practices and discourses of care and rethinking possibilities for abolition today. Much like Dylan Rodríguez, Liat Ben-Moshe has long worked at the nexus of activism, abolition, scholarship, teaching, learning, and coalition building. So we're all especially eager to learn from and think with both of you today. And at this point, I'll pass the mic over to Dr. Ben-Moshe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation, Dylan and Carla. Thank you for hosting me, and thank you for allowing me to inaugurate, I believe, the initiative, which is doubly and triply exciting, because these spaces are really rare, and I know this is just the beginning of the initiative, but I feel that it's a space that's very much needed, and a part of the impetus for me to do the work that I do, which is really the work of kind of bridging conversations. And it sounds like the series, actually both of the series, the On Violence and the initiative, are kind of also doing the work of bridging very needed conversations. And so I just want to start with a brief visual description. So I'm a very, very bright today because of the sun. Don't let it fool you. It's like a fall sun. It's not that hot. But white, middle-aged-ish person, woman, femme, queer, glasses, lipstick, gray hair, earrings. Behind me is a blurred background, but if I were to show you all the crap, the yellow thing behind me is actually a sign from a recent protest that says occupation is disabling, free Palestine. But then you also see all my cat stuff, so whatever. But I'm really glad to be here, and I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak a little bit about the book. I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes. I'm going to put my timer on so that we have enough time for conversation. And I'm going to share my screen. So just let me know if all right, can you see?
Looks good.
Okay, great. So a little bit about why this is important, and I should say that's what I'm going to talk about, why this is important. I'm going to start with a few kind of themes, key terms, the background behind my book, and just kind of throw at you really quickly a few lessons that connect deinstitutionalization and prison abolition. And I'm going to particularly focus at the end of my talk about the now. And the now is the part that came also after the book is written. I mean, literally now, like this week. So as some of you might know, there's a lot of interest in mass incarceration, a lot of interest in abolition. Some of it started for some people recently, like 2020. For some of us, it's been a much more kind of ongoing, sustained effort. However, disability or madness is not really part of the equation, not really a part of the conversation, even though it's really central to issues of mass incarceration, imprisonment, and abolition in the US. And this is for three main reasons. And this is basically what the book is about. The three main reasons are, or how the book kind of came to be, especially the first book, Disability Incarcerated. So the connection between disability and incarceration is pretty obvious for everybody who ever goes into any carceral facilities. Like disability and madness are everywhere. If you go to a prison, if you go to a jail. And this is also because that's how state violence works. It works through debilitation. So it targets particular population for debilitation, including through incarceration. But it also works through the pervasiveness of incarceration in the lives of disabled people. So disabled people are not only incarcerated in prisons and jails, but also you'll find us in nursing homes and institutions, in group homes, in a variety of carceral settings. So carceral settings are really, and carcerality is really the kind of trademark of our lives as disabled people. It's not an exception. And thirdly, which is the framework I try to bring in the book, Decarcerating Disability, is the framework of racial criminal pathologization, meaning criminalization is not the only pathway that leads to surveillance and policing and carcerality, but pathologization and medicalization are another pathway. And those pathways are completely intertwined. So we can't talk about criminalization without pathologizing, and we can't talk about racialization without pathologizing. And by the way, if I speak too fast for the interpreters, I can't see the chat, so just say that out loud if you can. Just tell me, slow down. So criminalization, racialization, and pathologization are also connected to what Ruthie Gilmore calls differential susceptibility to premature death, which is her definition of racism. And this is something I call in the book race ability, meaning that we cannot understand disability without understanding race and racialization, and vice versa, that they're completely intertwined through criminalization and pathologization. So I wanted to start, because this is the inaugural talk of the initiative, I wanted to start with just the question of what is disability justice and what is disability and madness. And, there's various ways to look at that. One is that disability is often looked at as a deficit, something to be fixed, something to be reduced or treated, something to be corrected. And at its core, this view of disability comes from colonialism, and it comes from eugenic logics. So another way to look at disability and madness, which is the way to look at disability and madness that comes from disability culture, from med culture, from disability studies, from the lived experience of med and disabled people, is to understand it as an identity, as a culture, and as a political category, a way to be politicized. It's a way to view the world, a way to produce art, humor, language, and also forms of resistance, which is what I'm going to talk about and what the book is about. It's also generative. It produces knowledge. So instead of looking at it as a deficit, look at it as generative. And it's also the subject of social movements. So when people get politicized, they organize together. So anti-psychiatry, disability rights, disability justice, and so on. I wanted to say one word about disability justice, which is the topic of your initiative. And that is that it's probably clear to most people in the room, but I want to emphasize, disability justice is not a combination of the words disability and justice. Please don't use it that way. That's not what it is. Disability justice is a framework, and it's a framework that's anti-capitalist. It's a framework that's anti-imperialist. It's a framework that's anti-militaristic. And Sins Invalid, which is one of the groups that have worked hard to elucidate the framework of disability justice, they're not the only ones, have talked about the 10 principles of disability justice, among them intersectionality, leadership by people who are most affected, the fact that everybody has inherent worth and value, regardless of whether or not they're productive, and productive under capitalism. So it's deeply an anti-capitalist politic and ethic. They also talk about interdependence and about collective access and collective liberation. And I'm going to show you in a few examples how that works in the case of deinstitutionalization. So people, maybe so far, a lot of people are, yes, abolition. We have a lot of critiques of prisons. We have a lot of critiques of carcerality. But surely you don't mean right now. And surely you don't mean here in the United States. And it can't be done. And some people talk about like experimentation in abolition. Marian Cabo calls it, 1,000,001 experiments. And what I think we can learn from deinstitutionalization is that abolition of carceral spaces is not just something we are doing in 1,000 experiments, and it's also not just something that's kind of a dream for the future and not just something we can do in other countries, but it has already happened, and it happened here in the form of deinstitutionalization in mental health and intellectual and developmental disabilities. So deinstitutionalization is the largest decarceration process and movement in U.S. history. And so we can learn from that about decarceration in other arena, and maybe also about abolition in other arena. So deinstitutionalization is the transition of people with disabilities from state institutions to community living. It's also the closure of these institutions, but it's not just a process. It's also a logic. It's a framework. It's a movement, a lot of different movements. At its core, it's an anti-segregation logic. So one of the lessons we can learn from deinstitutionalization is who can be decarcerated. And within the deinstitutionalization, particularly in the field of intellectual disabilities, this did not happen in the same way in the field of mental health, but particularly in the field of developmental disabilities, and in some facilities, psychiatric facilities, the idea was to first decarcerate or get out from institutions the people with the quote-unquote most severe needs, severe kind of medical needs, most complex needs, because if we can know how to support people with complex needs in the community, surely we can support everybody else. But if we wait to decarcerate people with the most quote-unquote severe needs till the end, they will likely still be in institutions now, which is what happened in a lot of institutions that didn't do that. And so what that lesson brings to today is this idea of, yes, abolition, but let's start with the non-nons, meaning the, the non-violent, non-sexual, quote-unquote offenders. I'm using the language of the mainstream language. So let's start with legalizing cannabis, let's start, and so on. But that praxis, is not supported by feminist praxis, which shifts the margin to the center, Black Lives Matter, disability justice principles, that really say we need to start from the people who are most affected, the people who are most harmed, the people who are quote unquote most severe. And a related lesson is that chipping at the margins will not necessarily break the center, meaning that if we're going to start by, let's first of all release the people who are, people sometimes talk about it as like, let's close all the youth justice, injustice facilities first. Let's release everybody that's over the age of 65. All of those are really good initiatives, but ultimately they're reformist initiatives. And again, chipping at the margin doesn't necessarily break the center. Another critique of abolition that we can learn from both prison abolition and deinstitutionalization, it's that people say, well, the critique is great, but it's not really prescriptive. It doesn't offer any alternatives. And one of the things that I try to do in the book is to talk about how sometimes offering a blueprint is actually unhelpful, and how these knowledges, what we might call maroon or subjugated knowledges, the knowledges of people who are fighting and have fought for the abolition of the carceral mindset behind institutions and prisons, what they teach us is not just blueprints or how to do, but a way to be. It's an ethic and an epistemologies, meaning it produces specific forms, not just content of knowledge, different ways of being, different ways of thinking. And it's also an ethical responsibilities. So because this is centered and comes from people who are most affected by state violence and capture, people for whom abolition for the future is already rooted in the survival of the now, then the future cannot wait. The future cannot wait. It cannot wait until all the ideal conditions have been satisfied. And this is what happened a lot during the deinstitutionalization. A lot of people said, you can't close this facility and you can't think about life in the community because there's no placements. You know, the waiting lists are really long. There's no placements for people in the community. We haven't created the alternatives yet. Well, if we would have waited, we would have still be waiting. There would have been no deinstitutionalization. So the point is not to wait. And again, of course, this is a nonsensical kind of this is a nonsensical kind of argument for people who are incarcerated, who of course cannot wait. So this sense of urgency enables abolitionism to become a model for political activity here and now, but with a vision for the future. So one of the other things, the other lessons is that the goal of abolition is not necessarily prescriptive. It's not necessarily finality, but it's about process. It's about movement, like literally to move together. And so once we, once somebody comes with a blueprint and says, I know how to do all the things, everything is already ready. I mean, this is not just idealistic. It's actually dangerous to have that. So abolition is a program of building and, as Ruthie Gilmore says, but it's also of dismantling. And this is something really important that in the previous conversation Dylan and I had, Dylan was very insistent on this point, and I thank you for that. So it's building and dismantling. The second kind of big lesson is, before I move to the kind of now, the second big lesson is how to decarcerate and what does it mean? And one thing I want to say about that, which is also about the now, is that dismantling and the kind of closure of facilities is not enough without, of course, dismantling the ideology, which also happened during the institutionalization. Today, for many, many people, especially people with intellectual disabilities, institutionalization is not the first kind of course of action. When somebody is born with an intellectual disability, usually today, somebody doesn't say, just institutionalize them for life. And that is a huge change that happened in just one generation. And that is amazing. The decline in admissions to facilities, to carceral facilities, to institutions for people with intellectual disabilities, to psychiatric hospitals has declined substantially And that is a huge, huge win. But it's not always enough. So decarceration is just one part of the equation towards abolition. And the second thing is that the backlash of even just that part, the closure, not even the full abolition, the backlash is real. And the backlash included and includes the narrative of the failure of deinstitutionalization. So if you remember nothing else from today, I hope you remember that when somebody tells you, oh, prisons are the new asylums, LA County Jail is the biggest mental health facility in the US, just go to LA County Jail and see how it's not anything like that. It's a site of incarceration, as were and are psychiatric hospitals. It's not the largest mental health facility because there's no mental health given there. But another thing that I want to say, and this is, I'm starting to connect it to the now, is that there's a lot of initiatives that I'll talk about in a minute that are going on around how deinstitutionalization led to homelessness, the rise of the homeless mentally ill, and it led to people being people with mental illness, quote unquote mental illness, being incarcerated in prisons and jails. So the narrative is that deinstitutionalization led to the rise of incarceration, often via homelessness or housing insecurity. But I want to say, and I want to be very clear here, and there's a lot about this in the book, so please feel free to read more. But people did not become homeless because of deinstitutionalization. They also didn't become homeless because they needed to be in institutions in the first place. Nobody ever, I cannot emphasize this enough, needs to be in an institution or in a psych hospital. That is not a home. So when somebody says, oh, now we're kind of like seeing more people because of deinstitutionalization, that is probably true. The kind of out of sight, out of mind. Now we see more people, but it doesn't mean any of that was a home for anybody or that anybody needed to be in these places to begin with. People are unsheltered and lack affordable, accessible housing because of economic inequalities and because of political economic realities, including racism, gender phobia, xenophobia, and economic realities, particularly neoliberalism. So deinstitutionalization didn't lead to homelessness and it didn't increase incarceration. It just so happened that it happened in exactly the same time. And like we say in the social science, correlation doesn't equate causation. Just because something happened at the same time doesn't mean one caused the other. What also happened at the same time is neoliberalism, which is incredibly connected to racism, which is, of course, privatization and budget cuts in all service and welfare sectors, and little to no funding for affordable and accessible housing or social services. At the same time that the budgets for corrections and policing and punishment of mostly poor people of color have ballooned. So this did happen at exactly the same time. And that is the causation, not the institutionalization. The consequence of the prison as the new asylum idea, or the backlash to the institutionalization, is that by painting the institutionalization as the culprit for the plight of people with mental health differences, the disabling effects of the prison remain intact, which is what I started us off today. We have to understand imprisonment as state violence, and we have to understand it also as a site of debilitation. And talking about prison deinstitutionalization as leading to that doesn't allow us to do that. It also doesn't allow us to see that deinstitutionalization, quote unquote, failed purposely. It was never truly implemented. It was never truly done the way that activists wanted it to, and the people who were incarcerated. There's coordinated smear campaigns, including this idea of prisons as the new asylum. And the funding went to literal corrections. which leads us to not understand deinstitutionalization as the biggest decarceration movement in US history. And I want to end with a few words now that will bring us into the conversation, which is what is happening now. And what is happening now is what I call in the book carceral saneism. And this is where we're at right now, 2023, this week. What happened post deinstitutionalization is a few things. One is the growth of what we might call deinstitutionalization and decarceration industrial complex. So a variety of things like halfway homes, for example, or e-monitoring, meaning, electronic bracelets, e-carceration, a variety of techniques of carcerality that are now also being profited on from the area of decarceration and deinstitutionalization, group homes, nursing homes. And so this is partially what I call carceral saneism. And I want to just explain for a minute what I mean by saneism. So some people might know what ableism is. Ableism, of course, is the oppression that people face due to disability. But insanism is the oppression people face due to the imperative to be sane, to be rational, to be not mad, not crazy, not psychiatrically disabled. And of course, the brunt of saneism is for people who identify or are articulated as mad or crazy or mentally ill. So carceral ableism and carceral saneism is the praxis and belief that people with disabilities or mad people need special or extra protections in ways that often expand and legitimate their further marginalization. So it's the use of pathologization, for example, disability, mental health. They just need help. People just need help. They just need treatment. And this becomes justification for carceral expansion. Because if people just need treatment, they really need like special treatment, right? Like special education, special locations. We can't have people with mental illness in jails and prisons. This is obvious to everybody. Well, let's create special units, either in prisons or maybe even outside of prisons. Let's create special jails. People with disabilities need specialized professionals. Note them saying all of this with irony. For people who can't see, I'm doing a lot of scarecrows and scare quotes and stuff like that. Okay, so people need special professionals like social workers instead of police, special treatment. But of course, that only expands carcerality. It does not, in fact, decrease carcerality. So this idea that people with disabilities, for example, or youth or women should not be in prison doesn't answer the question of should anybody be in prison? If some people shouldn't be in a psych facility, should anybody be in a psych facility? Like, why are we leaving those structures and logics intact? People who say we need more mental health care and not criminalization. Those are the same thing for a lot of us. When people say treatment, not trauma, treatment is trauma. These are not binary things. They are connected. Criminalization, pathologization, psychiatrization, racialization, they are connected. Incarceration doesn't just happen in prison or through criminal justice pathway. So what is happening now, and this is the last thing I'll say, is that we are talking about reinstitutionalization. So in addition to the kind of carceral saneism that I just named, and I'll give a few more examples in a minute, we're also talking about literally calls to bring back the asylum. So this is not even something different. This is not even calls for specialized care. This is literally people saying we should reopen psychiatric hospitals, like the opposite of what people fought for the last 60 years. If we don't connect disability and madness and fugitive knowledge for abolition, this is what we get. We get care courts. Care courts, for people who don't know, is what's happening right now in California. I know that last week, October 2nd, it rolled out in Riverside. So we can talk about it more in the Q&A, like what is happening on the ground right now. It's probably not enough time to say much about how it's unfolding, but it's definitely enough time to say how much the resistance is, because we have been resisting for, since we heard about this about a year ago. The other thing that's going on in LA is what they're calling assistive outpatient treatment. Do not fall into these euphemisms. Assistive, what the hell is an assistive outpatient? These are involuntary commitments, literally in psych facilities. This is bring back the asylum. This is what's happening right now. Yesterday, your governor in California signed a bill that loosens very long-standing, about 50 years worth of years, rules about who's eligible for involuntary treatment. And yesterday, he just broke that dam. He broke it. So the ability now to incarcerate people through involuntary commitment is happening. It's on the ground. It started yesterday. We need to resist it. The backlash, the gains of deinstitutionalization is real, and it's multiplying. Again, if you remember nothing else from this talk, is don't reproduce it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that overview, Liat. I'm going to ask my student colleague, comrade, friend, Amanda, to jump in with the first question for you. And folks that are in attendance, just a reminder about how we're approaching the rest of our time with Liat. Amanda and I will start the discussion with a couple questions. There's a couple students from the graduate seminar that's helping to kind of form and lead this on violence study sequence that will follow up. And then we'll open it up to other people in attendance to do the best with the remaining time. Go ahead, Amanda.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Ben-Moshe. This book was really, it just had so much in there that also hits close to home a lot. So I had so many questions, and then going back and looking at it, it was just super informative and really made me transform a lot of the way I was thinking. So I wanted to start by asking, there's an act that we're doing in California. It's called the ACA 8 Act. It's the End Slavery in California Act that's being pushed right now for people who are incarcerated, and it has to do with involuntary servitude. It doesn't talk about pay or any of that, just about the conditions of how the incarcerated people have to work in bad conditions. They're retaliated if they don't work. So really, they're just trying to put an end to that. My question with that is, reading your book and reading how during the entire decarceration and deinstitutionalization of these institutions, you talked about unpaid laborers, the institutionalized in there. And you mentioned how part of their protest to get paid wasn't necessarily a factor to decarceration. However, it accelerated it. And I wanted to know your thoughts on this act, and if you think it could be potentially increase institutionalized budgets if it gets passed, and if it leads to the expansion of carceral logics. And to follow up with that is your thoughts on whether or not you think it's a non-reformist reform. Because thinking of it as a sense of urgency of what we need to do now to help the people who are incarcerated, in a way we can look at it and say, yes, they're we're getting rid of involuntary servitude and we're trying to make it a little better for them. However, is that really looking at it as a non-reformist reform, or could we look at it in another way? Especially considering that disabled people aren't within, like, it's not highlighted within the act. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. That's a really good question. And maybe you can drop something in the chat for myself, but also other people who are not familiar with this kind of specifics of the act. So I can't speak to the specifics because I'm not, I don't necessarily know, but I know of it and of things like it. And I can say that during the era of kind of massive institutionalization, particularly in this was called the cottage system in the field of intellectual and developmental disabilities. The institution were massive, and this was also the beginning of kind of the asylum period, what we call later psychiatric hospitals. These were like massive places. Some of them had like farms. They had like a variety of adjacent kind of facilities on the ground. And this was because it was considered kind of good to do work like labor, right? Like labor is, great. And, but also because this is what kept the institutions alive. It was people who were incarcerated who did involuntary servitude, right? I mean, they're the ones who did the laundry. They're the ones who took care of each other. They're the ones who, kept the farm animals. They're the ones they did the work of keeping the institution alive. So, and in some ways, we see that like a little bit in prisons, but honestly, like less and less. What we see in prisons is more idleness and more, especially like in COVID and since, lockdown and nothingness, as opposed to labor. But so I want to say, things are kind of different, but also that it's really important to, and for people who are interested, by the way, in this analysis about institutions, you should totally read Marie Beckwith's book about involuntary servitude in institutions for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And the word servitude is in the title, and I'm going to remember in a second what the other word is. It's 2 words. But she wrote like a fascinating book about like that history and what that means. Not so much through the lens of abolition, though, which is what I want to kind of finish my answer with, which is your question about, is it a reformist and non-reformist reform? And I think that it's very complicated because, even disability servitude, thank you. So even the strikes that have happened, in the last 10 years, there's been various kind of work stoppages, pickets, strikes of people who are incarcerated in prisons, right? And those were like really complicated for a lot of us on the outside, that we kind of debated what is kind of our role within such demands coming from the inside. Demands that we don't necessarily see as abolitionary, but definitely might contribute to betterment of conditions of people inside. And my answer to that is like, I don't think you should ask me. Really, I think, like I said earlier, I think it's really important that the movements are led by the people who are most affected and actually know what's on the ground. So one of the things that has happened, even with these work stoppages, the work strikes, the protest, whatever you want to call them, there's been a variety of them in the last, I would say, 7-8 years, is that there's been enormous backlash for the people who even tried that. And by backlash, I mean for people who were incarcerated, not on a lot of us on the outside. And so, or not in the same way. So again, I think it's not that important, kind of what I think in relation to the question. I will only say that historically, those kind of improvement in conditions have proven to be unhelpful for abolition purposes. The improvement of conditions of confinement increases the longevity of carcerality and of particular carceral spaces.
Thank you for the brilliant question and the brilliant response. I'm going to ask another of our graduate students to introduce themselves and pose the next question, and then I'll jump in. Then one more grad student, and then we'll open it up.
I think that's me. So first, thank you, Dr. Ben-Moshe, for your talk today. I have a question related to affect and how you're working with affect in Decarcerating Disability, your book. So I guess this in part stems from your inclusion of Leroy Moore's poem in your introduction. I'm curious about how you have observed affect being used or being used by abolitionists as a sort of strategy. You describe effective strategies in decarcerating disability as a strategy that's used in NIMBYism, or not in my backyard sort of mentalities where disabled and people of color, people who are queer coded, are being pushed out of the sort of circle of inclusion. And I'm curious about if you have also seen affect being used by abolitionists to like counter these emotional attachments people have to carceral institutions as places that can provide safety and feelings of safety or removal from danger, if that makes sense. Sorry, that was a bit convoluted.
Totally makes sense. Thank you. Is it Lisa or Liza?
It's Liza.
Liza. Thank you, Liza. Great question. So one way to think about it is, yes, I do think abolitionists use affective economies and illicit emotions, which are, by the way, not the same thing, but they do both of those things. And I know because I am an abolitionist who does that. So everything I write about the book that's like critical is also a critique of me, right? So when I say we don't need prescription, we don't need, it's because I do those things. And I think that it's a knee-jerk reaction that we have. And sometimes it's effective with an E, also with an A, but also with an E. It kind of depends on what is the, it's a means to what end, right? So did I show an expose in class just yesterday to talk about how disability institutions were awful? Yep. Am I going to show one also next week? Also, yep. But these are undergrad students at UIC. We're a majority minority campus. All my students are CLJ majors, meaning criminology, law, and justice. They know very little about disability. They know much more about carcerality. I want to move them, right? I want to move them. And it's a cheap and effective way to start a conversation is through like shock and awe. And then we're going to have a discussion, including readings, about why that is not effective to all ends. Right? The means don't always, it depends on where you want to go with this. So even pedagogically, I'm also asking them to read about why that might be a problem while we're doing it. So I'm having them watch kind of historical things because I want them to know. I want to put them kind of in the space of what happened during deinstitutionalization, a space that, you know, of course, they were born after. But I also, you know, have a lot of critiques of it. So this is not me saying don't do the things, right? Like, don't say 5% of the world population, 15, you know, we all do that. But it depends on the audience. Like, some audiences, that makes no sense to do that with. And it's often also increase ableism and lack of agency. Like, if we show, for example, how horrible prison conditions are, but we don't talk about how people inside are resisting that, then that's, of course, brings people to believe that there is no resistance, or they don't know what that looked like. So I think it's a both and also for us to be reflexive and critical of the things that we use, and also how it might further things like ableism. So one of the issues with these kind of shock and awe campaigns, even in lawsuits, right? Like the California lawsuits, Plata versus Schwarzenegger. Well, Coleman and then Schwarzenegger was the famous lawsuit to release people from overcrowding in facilities in California. And a lot of things in that class action suit were hella ableist. And so the way to to talk about overcrowding was, this is what it does to people, and this is how disabling it is, and this is how people are like barely, you know, whatever, and this is how. So there may be other ways to talk about these things without being that ableist. But also for some people, and this was true to even some of the lawyers leading this, I think they knew, well, talking to some of them, they very much knew that this is the case. But for them, the end did justify the means. You know, getting people out of prison was what they wanted to do, and wanted to do it like urgently. And this was a way to do it, and they did it. So I think we just need to be critical about the fact that we're doing it, and what are the consequences of that. Right? What are we kind of like furthering while doing that?
Thank you, Leah. I appreciate anybody who pushes us to be relentless in the analysis, the theorization, the critique as we try to do shit. You know what I mean? Like, that's such an important thing for people to hear from you. So and from all of us. So I really do appreciate that's what praxis actually is. So thank you for that. I'm going to indulge myself in asking the next question, after which I'll ask one more of our MCS 201 grad students to ask a question, and then we'll open it up for whatever remaining time there is to other folks here. I know Shannon had a question in chat. So Liat, we kind of just barely started thinking about this together this week, but I'll pose this to you as a kind of contextual question as well. So you think, I know you to think deeply and constantly about the conditions of Israeli apartheid occupation of Palestine, the ongoing blockade of Gaza. You're a sharp, consistent critic of Zionism as a political ideology of colonialism and genocidal or proto-genocidal settler violence that narrates itself as an exceptional entitlement to homeland over and against the actual existence of Palestinian people. So I wanted to ask you to offer your thoughts on the events that have unfolded over the last days, as well as the longer extended period of apartheid occupation, asymmetrical casualties, and genocidal state violence in Gaza, Palestine, and Israel in relation to the framework of your book. I was thinking especially of something you wrote in chapter 2, which is titled Abolition and Deinstitutionalization, in which you think about the normalization and assimilation, about how the normalization and assimilation of disability ends up reproducing colonial power rather than challenging it. You write on page 80, normalization and rehabilitation are colonial impetuses to correct deviant and backward bodies and minds, stemming from particular Eurocentric assumptions on both an individual level, disciplining, and population level, civilizing as a biopolitical mode of governmentality, end quote. So my question is this: what does your focus, your theorization of normalization as a form of colonial power potentially teach us in real time about the conflicting interpretations, narrative framings, and responses to the breakdown, disruption, and perhaps the momentary denormalization of Israel's settler occupation of Palestine and its genocidal blockade of Gaza? Thank you for indulging that question.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dylan, for that really good question. And I want to also like personally thank you, because it really allowed me time. The time was yesterday at midnight to think, to think, right? So like a lot has been going on this week that affected myself personally as well, like my family. And I was able to kind of, for just a few minutes, use my intellect to start thinking through what is actually going on there. And I want to also say that I became politicized first as an anti-occupation activist. So before I became politicized as disabled, which I think is really interesting. I was disabled, but I wasn't politicized yet as disabled. So a lot of my kind of understanding of how politics works is through that lens. It's kind of anti-statist, anti-Zionist, anti-occupation lens. And in regards to the question about normalization and corrections, I'll say two things. One is in the book and in general, I think it's really important to understand corrections, what we might call the corrections industry, but any kind of corrections as a civilizing process, right? Something that was part of the colonial encounter and also its aftermath, something that was done in boarding school, this ideology of I'm going to say something, just content warning, very violent, but, the ideology of Captain Prent, the ideology of settler colonialism in the US, kill the Indian, but save the man. And I think that is what corrections is. So I'm not using that metaphorically. I really think the root of it is colonialist. I think the root of corrections, both in terms of rehabilitation as an ideology and in the correction industry, meaning criminal justice, and also of correcting disability, correcting abominations, right? Like abnormalities, so also queerness, also people who are gender non-conforming, all of those things, disciplining bodies, minds, normalization has colonial roots. And we cannot separate that from understanding how like indigenous communities were tried to like be civilized, assimilated by these very violent apparatuses that we have to call corrections. So to me, that is the root of this. It's not a metaphorical kind of root. I think that's what you alluded in your question. So this is what to me is so important with the epistemology of abolition, but also the epistemology of disability, of queerness, of like flaunting it, right? Is to say we are against corrections. We are fine the way we are. This is why, people reclaim queer, reclaim mad, reclaim crip, to say that this is a way of being in the world, and it's on you to figure out how you want to live with it. It's not on us to assimilate. Assimilation is colonialist. The other way of answering the question, I think, is through normalization, the way it's looked upon in Israel. So in the context of Israel-Palestine, there's a lot of talk about normalization, particularly through I think the biggest movement that is done the most to talk about it is the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions. I'm going to put that in the chat. And the way normalization is discussed in this discourse. It's basically an English translation to an Arabic word, tatbi, which is something like to make the abnormal appear normal. And so in the statement, one of the BDS's statement, I sent it in the chat. I just want to read like a few lines from it about what their definition of normalization is. From the BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement by the Palestinian civil society. It's helpful to think of normalization, they say, as a colonization of the mind, whereby the oppressed subject comes to believe that the oppressor's reality is the only normal reality that must be subscribed to, and that the oppression is a fact of life that must be coped with. Those who engage in normalization either ignore this oppression or accept it as the status quo that can be lived with. In an attempt to whitewash its violation of international law and human rights, Israel attempts to rebrand itself or present itself as normal, even enlightened, through intricate array of relations and activity encompassing high-tech, cultural, legal, LGBT, and other realms. So this idea of normalization in the context of Israel-Palestine is ongoing, meaning that Israel tries to really normalize its entire being through, I think people understand pinkwashing, but I don't think they understand necessarily the whole apparatus of Zionism is to normalize that all Jews go to the army. And by the way, all Jews that are not disabled. So I didn't go to the army. Most disabled people don't unless they volunteer. So, and this I think is an important exception. But normalize things that, again, for us seem very, very normal.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Brianna, do you mind coming on and asking your question, and then we'll open it up after that?
Hi, Dr. Ben-Moshe. Can everyone hear me? Well, okay. I have two questions, one long, one short. So my work is on global anti-Blackness, healthcare, and invention in Kenya, and it's one of the two contexts I want to offer. I work around body detention, so hospitals, mental health facilities, and morgues physically keep any patient that cannot pay their bill until it's paid, and it can be inherited. These come for any patient that chooses to participate, as well as involuntary commitments. My question around invention relates to how you take up clairvoyance, and I'm interested in the cosmology that you're invoking when you critique clairvoyance. I read your book broadly as about a failure of praxis. So I have a question about clairvoyance versus intuition in terms of the role of mental difference in inventing so many different ways to recreate relations, to recreate community, and what this other world might look like. The second context that I want to offer for my other question, I'm going to put the link in the chat, is about Emmanuel Fru, a Black autistic man who is involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility in Sweden. First, it was a mental health response. It escalated to crisis. He was involuntarily committed, and the caregivers there painted clown face makeup on his face. His family came to see him. They spoke out about this. His family has been banned from seeing him, and he's now serving a life sentence in this facility. So my question related to global anti-Blackness is how deinstitutionalization opens up in consideration of anti-Blackness, and specifically the role of animality in producing not just raciality, but what gets considered sane, what gets considered inferior, in excess, savage, and even the ways that we're able to index what becomes disability. So I'm wondering how that troubles or opens things up in how you conceptualize raceability, what deinstitutionalization looks like, And I'm partially asking this because even in the context of my research, doing away with hospitals is insufficient because the institution is reconstituted at any moment, whether within a hospital and physically chained to the bed, or if you're at home in the informal settlement that I'm working in as well. So I'm curious as to what dis epistemologies might look like, what that epistemological rupture would look like when you take up anti-Blackness and the role of animality specifically as a methodology of objection, and what might we do around clairvoyance, because I read that more as about control and attachment issues. And so I'm curious about the role of intuition and invention in response to the conditions that you're critiquing. Thank you.
Thanks, Brianna. And just to say, and I think it's the same for Amanda, I don't think you need me for the answer to this. I think you're obviously a brilliant thinker on this on your own. And, you know, so I just have to offer a perspective. It's not the perspective. What I think in regards to kind of global anti-Blackness is, first of all, I'm going to try to find it quickly, but there's a really great conversation in the Black Agenda report about anti-Black Sanism that I think is very related to the example that you just gave. I didn't click on the link, but the link from Facebook that I think would be like really helpful to kind of unfurl some of what you're talking about. What the discussion of anti-Black sanism and also carceral sanism in relation to what I call racial criminal pathologization can bring is exactly this intersection that you're talking about. Is that I don't think any of these are separate or that we can talk about them separately. So when I talk about racial criminal pathologization, I didn't mean to just like create words, right? Like I really think it's a phenomena in the world that I'm trying to describe, and other people have described it with other words. So I'm not wedded to the words, but I am wedded to the intersections, right? Like to the way these are totally embedded within each other. That there is no way to understand the way we pathologize people without understanding racialization. What is that way, right? So when in almost all the police brutality cases, even when they don't involve people with disability, and I don't know why I said police brutality, I never actually used that word, police shootings, police killings, police is brutality. But in all of those cases, what we see is that the kind of Black subjects, I'm not going to say people because they're obviously not people to the people who shoot them, are described as some kind of animalistic, right, or mad or crazy or kind of out of control, dangerous. Their body themselves was dangerous. It doesn't even matter if there's a weapon. They were the weapon, right? So I don't see how we separate this. How do we even separate it? It's inseparable. And so I think that that's kind of what that framework brings. It's just ways to name what's already happening, which is this kind of extreme confluence of things that have happened, not since eugenics, like even before eugenics, of course. And the same with settler ableism. So I think settler ableism also names, something about the words that you use, inferiority, animality, uncivilized, in ways that are just inseparable. I think settler colonialism works through ableism and sanism. So I think settler ableism And by the way, the people who want to read more about this should definitely read Susan Birch's book, Committed. Beautiful, beautiful, heart-wrenching work that she's done over decades with the descendants of people in the Kenton Asylum for quote-unquote insane Indians. And she talks there about settler ableism, a term that she did not coin, but that she describes throughout that book. So again, I don't have much to say other than like agree with you and say that these are things that are completely related to each other. And lastly, your point about carcerality outside of institutions, I think, is related to this notion of this epistemology, because, carcerality is not a space, right? I mean, the book obviously talks about spaces of confinement, particularly institutions, because I talk about deinstitutionalization, but ultimately deinstitutionalization is a logic, and it's a logic about how to be free. And to be free doesn't just mean the dismantling of a space, right? It's a dismantling of a space, right? Like a consciousness. And also the material conditions that enable that to flourish. And so it's really important that it's not again like taken up by this kind of like idea that we somehow have the ability to see the future. But I think it's very much possible for us to insist that what we want is freedom, and that we struggle together to like just be humble, right? That we struggle together to figure out what that means. And I think like my answer about Palestine earlier, I just think we have to be humble. I think our knee-jerk reaction is not, is to be, anyway, I'm not going to get into it, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like a knee-jerk reaction is not to be humble. And it's also perhaps not to be in community. And it's perhaps not to ask questions. It's perhaps to give answers. And sometimes what we need is not the answers. It's the actual questions. And it's the question we ask in study and in community. And I think that's also what, this initiative and Dylan, what you're trying to do in a community of people is to, ask us questions. And we can think about it together.
Appreciate that. I think that goes with the spirit of, and not just the spirit, but also the framework and the humble guidance that you offer in the book as well, which is to push us to think of abolition as an epistemology, as a method, and as experimentation, constant experimentation. It's a important, I think, counter and anti-statist and counter state-like way of thinking about community and power and transformation, that kind of thing. So we have about 10 minutes left. So I want to open up these last precious minutes to other folks who are here. I know my comrade Shannon asked a question in the chat, which I'm happy to read unless they want to come on and ask their question live. But there's a lot of folks here from all over California, from UC Riverside, but also from all over the continent. I see Susila here. I already said Shannon's here. I see a bunch of y'all here. So folks, feel free just to raise your digital hands and ask Liat anything you like. And if not, I'm happy to read Shannon's question. Well, I really like Shannon's question. I'm going to read it. Okay, thanks, Shannon. Shannon writes in the chat, in your book, you eloquently lay out the necessity of disepistemologies in abolitionist praxis. Why did you feel it important to name this root work? And why is it integral to actively engage in it?
Yeah, thank you. Well, you know why it's important, because root means radical means to the root, right? So as radicals, I think it's really important for us to think to the root. And this is also why it was important for me to do a genealogy to begin with. So I'm not a historian, and it was still really important for me to go to the root, right? Like to understand deinstitutionalization as an epistemology, as a form of knowing. And I think that what was important for me in this epistemology of abolition, again, other than this kind of commitment to being more humble and to be in community, is also to question this kind of knee-jerk reaction of people who tell us, if you don't have the solution, don't come to me, don't speak. If you don't know what to do, then just like sit down, which I'm sitting down anyway all the time. But for people who don't know, I'm a wheelchair user anyway. But so that to me felt not just problematic, but also deeply sexist and patriarchal. And in the book, I use the word of Sarah Ahmed and other abolitionists, feminists, to talk about the kind of like the feminist killjoy, right? The people who are like raining on the parade, whether it's the Disability Pride Parade or the Queer Pride Parade or the a variety of parades. But it's also to say that I deeply disagree with that framework of if you don't have the answer. I think people who come with answers are often very dangerous, often authoritarian, often even if they think they kind of know best. And so again, this is why a genealogy mattered, because it was important to think empirically about what happened, not to just talk from what I wished, right? But from what actually transpired in a historical case study. And also to say, hey, y'all, if you think there's like lessons in here, you actually can't import them into closing down prisons, because that's not how this works. But there's like meta lessons here to think about, including how to think about abolition. But I really, it's really important for me to have that caution particularly for organizers. Like, I think there's a lot of lessons in the book about how to do decarceration, and especially how not to do, or maybe both. But it's absolutely not a blueprint for anything. And I think ultimately that's what abolition gives us, is like freedom of thought. And I don't mean that in like fascist way. I'm sorry, that's how it came out. But in a humble way, like moving towards movement, a constant like trial and error, a million experiments, and so on.
Thank you so much. We have time for maybe one more comment or question from folks here. Maybe anybody who's involved with. Go ahead, Carla. I see you.
First of all, thank you so much. This has just been incredibly important and open and honest. And I just thought I would end with a question from a grad student. That's all right, Jenna Wilson, who had to leave early. And she's deeply engaged with your work and with abolition praxis. And one of the things she's really would love to hear about, particularly at the end of a session like this, and particularly given her own sense of hopelessness right now, about abolition and what's going on right now. She would love to hear you say a few words about particularly compelling abolitionist projects that you've been involved in, that you've heard about, that you would like to share with us, sort of uplift in her language.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great way to kind of end. So I already put in the chat the kind of abolition and disability justice collective, statement about Palestine, which I kind of go back to as needed, and unfortunately it's needed a lot. So that's something that I think provides like some clarity. But I'm involved in a national coalition. People are welcome to contact me if they want to get involved in it as well. National, I'll put my email in the chat. then it's a national coalition that's trying to battle exactly the last things I talked about, meaning carceral sanism, and particularly the bringing back the asylum. So, you know, people, a lot of us have been fighting for decades. I myself have not been fighting for decades, but I'm fighting with people who literally saw the asylum system kind of like crash and burn, and now it's resurrected. And so we're in a national coalition with particular arms in New York and California. I'm in Chicago, but trying to kind of battle what's going on all across the nation in terms of these outpatient treatment orders, in terms of these legislation. A lot of it is, or at least some of it is fought by people who are disability rights activists. But I think there's a bunch of us abolitionists like on there who are also pushing people with kind of rights framework to kind of think larger and harder, you know, and so on. We're having, you know, interesting kind of debates and conversations. And if people want to join us, email me.
Well, what would be amazing is as we build our resource page around these kinds of questions, just touch base with you and share our resources and learn from you about these sources. And we'll be in touch with folks about our lab develops with Dylan, Fusan, Matt, everybody who's involved in this. Like, enormous thanks, Liat Ben-Moshe, for being with us today. This is absolutely brilliant. So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to express my love and respect for you, Liat, and thank you for coming through. And I feel like you're an annual. You're.
Oh, you're muted.
I was just saying, I want to express my love and respect for you, and thank you for coming through. And it feels like you're an annual honored guest here. So let's keep that going. And special thanks to Carla, Fusan, Matt, and folks with the initiative. This is a pretty amazing way to inaugurate this thing, and I just really appreciate being invited to make a small contribution to the work of this group. And you know, I think it's really meaningful that you all were so intentional in foregrounding this experimental revolutionary praxis of abolition, as aspirationally revolutionary praxis of abolition, as a central part of that work. So so thank you. Shout out to everybody who came through. Shout out to all the students and colleagues who were here. Shout out to all the organizers and activists and other thinkers and intellectuals who are here. I'm looking forward to seeing you all at both at the initiative's next event, and perhaps you all can join us for the next parts of the On Violence experimental study sequence as well. Good afternoon, everybody. Take care of yourselves and be good to each other in this time of conflict.